Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this hearing on the Special Committee to increase the representation of women in the Legislative Assembly. I appreciate the effort to come out on a very cold evening, and I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this discussion. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie Green. I'm the MLA for Yellowknife Centre, and I'm the chair of this special committee. The committee was formed in the fall to recommend solutions to increasing women's representation in the 20th and 21st Legislative Assemblies. So that's not the next one. It's the one after in 2023 and the one after that in 2027. So in a report that will be produced this year, The committee will identify barriers that women face in running for elected office, describe incentives that mitigate these barriers, and recommend changes where appropriate to current rules of the Legislative Assembly, related legislation, policies, and/or programs. We have invited input from a broad range of people and organizations in the Northwest Territories, such as Indigenous governments and organizations, municipal governments, chambers of commerce, non-governmental organizations, and professional societies. Committee also wrote to women who are in leadership now or have been in the past to ask them to participate. I'm now going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start on my right with Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Caroline Cochran, MLA for Range Lake. That's Walmart area.
Lou Siebert, Tabacha.
Tom.
All right. Thank you. I'm Tom Bollier, MLA for Trinidad-Willity.
Good evening, welcome. My name is Corey Van Fine, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, members. We're also joined by Committee Clerk Jennifer Frankie-Smith to my left and our researcher Kathleen Knuch, who is sitting at the end of the table. We usually begin our meetings with a prayer, and we're going to do that again tonight, and I'm going to ask MLA Tom Bollier to do that for us. Please stand.
Merci, Tanapayastia. I pray today to the Heavenly Father for guidance as we do the important work of this committee to create better representation or attempt to create better representation by women at the Legislative Assembly. I pray that we can do this with respect and dignity appropriate to our positions and respect towards each other and respect towards the people that we have in our audience today. Amen.
Merci. Tom? I would like to set the stage for today's discussion. The Northwest Territories Legislature has the lowest representation of women in any jurisdiction in Canada. Just 2 of us hold seats, myself and the minister, in a Legislative Assembly of 19, so 2 out of 19, which is a little less than 10%. In past elections, more than half of the ridings did not include women candidates, and in ridings where women were on the ballot, they were outnumbered by male candidates by as much as 5 times, depending on the year. For example, in 2015, our last election, 10 women candidates out of a total of 60 candidates ran for electoral seats. On March the 8th, 2018, last year's International Women's Day, members of the Legislative Assembly unanimously passed a motion to establish a goal of increasing representation of women to 20% by 2023 and 30% by 2027. If the ledge stays at the same size that it is today, that would be 4 women in 2023 and 6 in 2027. The Speaker of the NWT Legislative Assembly, the Honourable Jackson Lafferty, then tabled a discussion paper on how to increase women's representation in the Assembly by establishing a number of seats with temporary special measures. And there's a copy of the paper and other handouts on that table just inside the door if you'd like to take it home with you. I'm looking forward to your help tonight to identify specific barriers and ways to reduce them so that more women will participate in politics. We also have prepared information sheets, as I mentioned, that are on that table. If there's anyone who wishes to make comments on the mandate and the goals of the special committee or on the discussion paper, please make yourselves known, and we'll ask you to state your name and sit at the front. If you have written materials to submit, either tonight or at another time, the handouts have the address of our committee clerk, Jennifer Frankie-Smith, and you're welcome to email them to her. To start tonight, Jennifer has a short presentation about of an overview of where we're at to help spark some discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jennifer. And the presentation is on the screen here.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. So the committee is really focused on getting input from the public. That is the main goal, is to figure out what it is that committee can do to encourage women to come out to run for legislative assembly. So how are women represented in the Legislative Assembly currently? In the Legislative Assembly, women comprise half the population of the NWT, but are underrepresented, accounting for no more than 15% of members of the Legislative Assembly. The lack of representation by women may have resulted in the creation of legislation and policy that does not take women's needs and concerns fully into account. What is the role of this special committee? It's to identify and recommend initiatives that will increase the representation of women in the Legislative Assembly to 20% by 2023 and 30% by 2027. And as I mentioned earlier, the committee definitely wants to hear from the public, mostly about what holds women back from running for election to be a member of the Legislative Assembly, and how can these barriers be lowered or removed, and what incentives may encourage women to run. The special committee will prepare reports describing the barriers that prevent women from running, noting the incentives that break down these barriers, and suggest solutions to the 20th and 21st assemblies. So I'll briefly speak more about what the discussion paper on temporary measures is about. So the speaker tabled a paper to generate discussion on how to increase women's representation in the assembly. The paper represents a model based on the system adopted in Samoa, which guarantees a minimum number of seats for women. The paper describes how this system could be applied to elections for the NWT. The special committee was created to look at these various options. So the focus of the discussion paper is on establishing a temporary number of guaranteed seats for women. MLAs want to see 4 seats occupied by women in 2023. If fewer than 4 women are elected, if fewer than 4 women were elected, women who lost would be appointed to meet the goal. Given the results of the 2015 election, where 2 women were elected, had the temporary special measures been in place, 2 women would have been appointed to their position. So what would the result look like? Results from the NWT elections of 2015, 2011, and 2007 show how this scenario would have played out. To achieve the target of 20% women, 3 additional seats would have been required in 2015 and 2011, and 2 additional seats would have been required in 2007, as 3 women were elected that year. So some potential solutions are to establish a quota for these seats for women using the temporary special measures model, or provide a financial incentive for women to run, such as a refund on campaign expenses based on the results. Provide daycare costs as part of the constituency work allowance MLAs receive. Establish regular sitting hours for committees so parents can plan ahead for their family lives. Continue to offer campaign schools that provide women with skill development, including messaging, fundraising, campaigning, and managing social media. Use online tools such as Equal Voice Canada's Getting to the Gate to learn more about political life and campaigns. So how you can get involved and let the committee know your input and thoughts. You can send an email to myself, and my email address is up on there, Jennifer_FrankieSmith@gov.nt.ca, or attending the public meeting as you are tonight. There are 5 more scheduled. There's one, the next one is on January 23rd in Fort Simpson at 7 p.m. And if you have any questions, you can also just send me an email or give me a call. And that information I can provide to you afterwards if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that overview. And so with the stage set, we're now interested in hearing from you. It's fine if you don't have a polished presentation. If you have questions or just a simple comment, a lot of comments, just please feel free to come and tell us what you're thinking. I see that we have women here with some political experience and who have had a campaign or 2 and know what that's like. So we're interested in hearing from all of you about the things that might help you to be successful or things that are standing in your way. Dave, would you mind joining us at the front? Welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight, Dave.
It's my great pleasure.
Okay.
I spend a lot of time on that side. Kind of feels kind of different sitting on this side.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will proceed. I have a small presentation that I'd like to make, and I'm going to preface it by saying that I don't think you're ambitious enough.
Okay.
By 30% representation by 2027, that doesn't seem like enough to me. I think that you should be looking for 50% in that time frame, if not before. And there's a reasonably easy way of accomplishing that. Probably not easy. I should have said, I should have said simple. It's fairly simple, but nothing is easy in politics. You could ask Theresa May about that, I guess. Anyway, if we have in each constituency 2 MLAs, 2 representatives, 1 male and 1 female in each constituency, that would solve the problem. It wouldn't solve all problems, but it would solve the one we're faced with right now, the problem of unequal representation. And I think that can be accomplished within a matter of lifetime of 2 legislatures, for sure, if not quicker. It's not my idea how it's done. I'm not smart enough to figure out ideas like that, but I think I'm smart enough to recognize one when I see one. Somebody else is. And if you wanted, say, 20 MLAs in the legislature, you would have to divide the territories up into 10 constituencies, and each one would have 1 man and 1 woman. And then you would end up with your 20 MLAs. Male candidates would form 1 list in each constituency, and female candidates would form another list. So if you want to run, everybody has the right to run. Men go on one side, women go on the other. And everybody gets 2 votes, maximum of 2 votes. And one of these votes has to be used to elect a man, and the other vote has to be used to elect a woman. And I think it's important that everybody, both male and female, vote for male and female candidates. I wouldn't want to see a system where it's just women voting for women or men voting for men. I don't think that would be right. When you're an MLA, you have to represent everybody. You know, it's not even just the people who voted for you. You have to represent them who voted against you as well. So I think that's important. And if you will recall, about 20 years ago, when Nunavut broke off from the Northwest Territories, was excised from the Northwest Territories, there was quite a debate over this very issue at that time. And it never really got that far, presumably because people were, the Nunavummiut were having such an adventure at the time, they didn't want to confuse it by adding yet more things in there. But it got a lot of currency. Eventually it wasn't adopted, and all the time this was going on, I was hoping that it would pass and they would adopt that system, but they didn't. So that now gives us the opportunity to go first. Yeah. If you propose a system, you have to assess it against certain kind of democratic ideals. And the tests. In this case, I would say that one of the two most important tests in my mind, one is that everybody has the chance to run. All people, assuming they make age qualifications and that, have the right to run for office. And the system that I've just talked about would allow that to happen. Everybody should have a vote. That's the second test. And the system would allow that to happen. And each vote would count equally. So nobody gets special votes, and it's not like the Ford Motor Company where if you're a shareholder and your name is Dave Nicholson, you get one vote for a share, and if your name is Edsel Ford III, you get 30 votes a share. So it passes that test. There's one other test that I thought was kind of important, and I'm not quite so sure about this. And that's the test that there are no special reserve seats. And you could argue this both ways. You could say that, yeah, there are certain reserve seats, but it's the same for everybody. And it's not like the proposal that was made in the initially this evening, where you kind of setting aside seats for persons of such and such a gender. It's not like that at all. And I guess a side benefit would be that it's not going to cost a hell of a lot more public funds to administer it. There'll be certain difficulties involved. You'll have to reassess the electoral divisions. So you'll have to get the Electoral Boundaries Commission involved in it. For places like Yellowknife or Hay River or Newvik, it wouldn't be too much of a problem, but other places it probably would. I guess in this day and age, some people have some problems with gender uncertainty, and you'd have to resolve them one way or another. But for 99.99% of the population, I don't think that would be much of a problem. Okay. Anyway, if you adopt a system like this, I think it requires a leap of faith. And maybe we can do it more easily in a small jurisdiction such as the Northwest Territories. Because if we make a mistake, we do this and it doesn't work, it's fairly easy to change, and it hasn't had a major impact on the rest of Canada. But if it works out well here, I can see Ontario and Quebec and other places adopting the same idea. And we would be the leaders. It's your opportunity to take the lead on this important issue. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholson, for coming and talking to us. Are you prepared to answer some questions if my colleagues have any?
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone on the committee or present at the table have any questions for Mr. Nicholson?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think you've addressed the issues. I had to worry about people with the identity. I'm not sure if just designating for men and women is even politically correct at this stage in our society. But the bigger issue, I think, and you've said that, would be dividing the boundaries, because already a lot of the MLAs in the smaller communities say that they have so many communities, and the money that they have to do that, it's not feasible, and they are at a disadvantage than people, MLAs from like Yellowknife or Newvik and Hay River, because we don't have to charter airplanes. We just knock on doors every single night. So by making the boundaries less than the 19, turn them into 10 potentially, I could see there would be an issue with the amount of travel, and so we'd have to also look at the accommodation for that as well. Would be my only comment on that.
Yeah, that is going to be one of the problems attached to this. I mean, nothing comes that easy, and it will require a good deal of thought.
Thank you. I have a question. So one of the issues in the NWT is that not every riding fields a woman candidate. Half of them don't. And some ridings have never had a woman candidate. And so how would we attract more women to run? Do you think that having a seat for each in any given constituency would be an incentive? Or how would we get them to sign up?
I think it probably would, and for this very reason. There has to be one woman elected in that constituency. And if you're getting close to the deadline for putting your name down, and no other females have yet put their name down, a lot of people might be thinking, gee, that's a job I could do. I don't really feel very much at home going around knocking on doors and doing all this sort of electoral stuff, but if given the opportunity, I could learn to do it. And there's a good chance that somebody will put the name down at the last minute if nobody else has.
You know, you're probably right about that. If it looked like it was going to be simple, maybe more women would do it. Yeah. One last round, any questions for me? Thank you very much for talking to us about this idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're open we're open for comments, questions, ideas, revolutions. I'll just speak to a point that Dave made about us not being ambitious enough. I understand what he's saying, and we've been asked about this at other hearings. Why did we set those goals where we did? And the answer is that they represented something we thought we could achieve, given where we're at now. And that there are only a few jurisdictions in the whole world that have 50% representation of women. And 30% is considered by the United Nations to be the threshold at which women have real influence at the table in the making of policy and legislation. And so that's why we wanted to go up to 30%. I think the most successful jurisdiction in Canada is 40% in BC, or almost 40% in BC. So we tried to pick something. To go from 10% to 50% seemed like more than we were going to achieve in one fell swoop. So we made our goals modest, and we want them blown out of the water.
I don't think I have anything revolutionary to say as far as what the barriers are and such. First of all, I did want to say, though, thank you to Dave for being the only male here that's not media. That's actually very, I'm assuming, are you not media? Sorry, you had your camera out, so thank you to both of the men for showing up. That actually speaks volumes to me about really how important this is to people in the Northwest Territories. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katrina Knockleby. I'm a professional engineer. So I pretty much spent most of my career kind of battling the same issues. So I guess to me, the biggest barrier that I would have, or I would think, would be, first of all, the financials, like you mentioned. The number $15,000 has been floated around as what you would need to run. That could be a huge barrier, particularly for somebody like myself, where I would have to take a leave of absence from my job. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous to talk to you guys. But so for me, that would mean not only having to find that money, but also loss of income during the election campaign. Also the conflicts of interest, being a consultant in Yellowknife, would be a very hard thing to navigate. A lot of my client work comes from the GNWT itself. So how do I deal with that? I have zero idea. So I would need maybe some education around how do I deal with the legalities of running based on my job. I think the biggest one for me, though, would be personal reputation and attack. I don't feel for myself that I have a thick enough skin to deal with what will come my way. And I'm going to put it out there, but we all say it, women have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. So the tax will be personal. We saw it in the mayoral campaign, where personal attacks about appearance, things like that are happening. So I don't know if perhaps education for men and others, or just general public, I shouldn't specify men either. I don't like it when it's done for me, so I do it the other way. But general education to the public about respect for candidates and what it means of people putting themselves out there, and just some dialogue and language around that. So that's my piece.
Yeah, thank you for that. The money barriers are ones that we've heard about before. In addition to the two that you've listed, you would likely take a pay cut to do this job. You
I'm a consultant, so no, I won't. If I worked for the GNWT, yes, I would.
Yes. So in some cases, professional women in particular would be taking a pay cut to take this job.
Right.
It is not paid on par with being a professional or a GNWT employee. So that certainly is an issue. Now, if you knew that you were going to get some of that money back based on how you finished, let's say there was a threshold you needed to get 10% of the vote, and if you did that, you would get 50% of your money back, just hypothetical numbers. Would that be of any interest to you on the financial front?
Yes, it would be more of interest if you just gave me the money up front, though, instead of making me, if you're considering how many candidates you're really going to get, I don't know if you would have like a pool and then you divide it amongst how many women that you did get putting their names forward. That might be the way to go. But honestly, yeah, like I know I'm financially, I can float the loss until I do get, if I were to be elected. So yes, I guess the answer would be that would definitely give me some more incentive for sure.
Okay. The personal attacks, I don't know what to say about that except it's real. That is,
I've seen it in your case,
yeah,
so I know.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is a part of the job, and I think that everybody comes up with their own method of dealing with it. Like they don't read the comments under the news stories, or they don't read the comments on Facebook. There are different ways of doing it, but there is no question that you are a public figure once you're elected, and people feel free to say the damnedest things to you on that basis.
Right.
So
perhaps maybe assertiveness training or some sort of training for female candidates so that they are better able, like I'm already coming up and I can feel the shake, and I get up and talk and moderate conferences, but I still feel nervous to come up here and sit and talk in front of all of you. So something to the effect of just helping women with public speaking. Like I think I do better than some, but I know there are a lot of women that are like, I could never get up in front of a group of people and tell them what I think. And these are great women with lots of amazing ideas who are hard workers, who, are the ones doing the work in our communities, but they're not like, I don't have that personality to get up there and do it. And that's what I hear a lot from women.
Right. Well, these are the kinds of skills that I hope that the new campaign school curriculum will assist women in acquiring. And I think another way of acquiring them is through mentorship. And I think that you'll find that both men and women are willing to mentor candidates so that they acquire these skills. Public speaking is a fundamental skill of this job. Sooner or later, when you're elected, you have to stand up downstairs and talk. So that really is an issue, and I guess everybody comes to it in their own way, how they manage that. So thank you for your points. Would you mind if my colleagues have questions?
Sure.
Lou has a question, and Corey.
I have a question. You mentioned financial support, either money up front or reimbursed later on. Are you suggesting that would only be for women candidates?
Well, I mean, considering your focus here is to increase female representation, yes, I would say too, I would imagine, I don't know the stats, but probably the male candidates do better in fundraising, I would guess, for their roles. So I don't know if there's some help in fundraising for women, maybe giving them some skill sets around that, even just a guidance document and how you go about that. What are the rules for fundraising? Can I hit up my friends in BC who are like, you need to do this? Can you? No, I don't know. So.
Yeah, we did hear in a presentation that we saw early on that women were reticent about asking others for money, so that certainly is a point.
Right.
Thanks.
I have Corey on my list and then Kevin.
Hi, thanks Katrina, thanks for coming and being brave enough to present. And you made a point, or you noted that in your circumstance that you would have to take leave.
Yeah.
And maybe you could explain for us a little bit more about how that works and why in your situation, I understand you're an engineering consultant.
Yeah.
Why you would have to take leave and when would that be? Is that just during the writ period?
Right.
And
For
how
me,
does
it would
that
be
work?
because particularly well, I think this also addresses when the elections happen is actually a very terrible time because for consulting in the north, all of our field season and work is from basically like July through to, with all the reporting into November and December. So really, this is the most hectic time in which I would be normally working. So for me, I'm already a stressed out consultant as it is because, I can go on about that for hours. But so I could not in any capability be able to do both at the same time. And then I would look at it, I know I would personally really struggle with where is the dividing line, and I already struggle with that in Yellowknife because it's such a small town already, of what can I say, I'm a talker. So, I know I'll put my foot in my mouth, I'll do the wrong thing. Like I said, maybe I won't, my company will miss out on bids because, well, she's leaving. She's going to be hopefully she'll be the new MLA, right? So maybe they won't award a contract to my company based on me being on that proposal because I might not be there. So it would just be more, a lot of it mostly would be stress management for myself, though. So I believe I would take probably mid-August and go from there off, but just because I have a vacation I want to take in mid-August too. But yeah, so basically about 2 months off, I figure, because it's mid-October is the election, is that correct?
It's actually
October 1st.
October 1st this year, okay.
October 1st this year, so the
well,
whole
that's
month
good. Maybe
of
less of a
September.
leave of absence if I decide. But
So that's good to know because I think for some folks, it's seems to me that would be more of a personal choice.
Yes,
to kind of
yes,
do that,
it's not-
whereas there are some folks whose employers would require that.
And
they
maybe
take
mine
leave.
would. I'm not, because I don't want to tell them at this point if this is something I'm considering, because it then also hurts me in my career. So it's going to be this very fine balance if I were to decide to run. When do I go to my employer and say, by the way, I'm taking 2 months off in the busiest season of the year, when I basically am the office here?
Okay.
So I do know that when Rebecca was running as mayor, she had to leave her job because her employer said this is a conflict or this could be considered one. So that is definitely something considered, I'd say, by women when they run, especially if they have families. I don't, but I can imagine then when you have other financial tolls on you, you can't make that choice for yourself anymore.
And if I may, Madam Chair, so also one other thing is I'm very interested in the idea of fundraising workshop.
Yeah.
You feel that would be something that would be good for,
Yeah.
specifically tailored for women
For women, yeah.
to sign up for?
I think Julie made a good point in that women are not good about sort of advocating a lot of times for themselves, and that would include asking for money or selling yourself even. There were a few times, again, in different elections where I've heard comments made about the women running that I'm like, you would never make that comment about a man. But, because it's a woman, like someone was, she doesn't have a family, so I don't think she's very family oriented. And it's like, for me, I don't have a personal, immediate family, but I'm an aunt. I'm a Girl Guide leader. I have many people in this community that I consider to be my family. So to have that said about a woman, but never hearing that ever said about a man. So there's things like that where I think, too, in the fundraising school, it could be an educational piece for the women on what does it actually mean financially when you run, who can you solicit bids or donations from, et cetera. So build it all around that, and then how do you also go about getting that money? So you could do kind of a combo.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Kevin?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for coming here this evening. You come from a profession that's male-dominated. I went to University of Waterloo. Virtually all the engineers were men. But are there any lessons learned from your profession and some of the struggles you've had there, perhaps that we can learn from and that might help more women enter into
How much
politics?
time do you have?
We can go offline and
it's-
talk all
I would
night.
say it's actually a very good parallel, for sure. I would say, like, I spent a long time in my professional career not feeling like I had any voice, not wanting to be that girl, that woman, making demands. If someone said something inappropriate, I would just laugh it off because I'm in a camp, I'm alone. Generally, I'm the only technical female in the camp. And so I would be, ha, ha, ha. And then I realized after a point what was happening was every time I didn't establish my boundary and my line, they were just continuing going forward with it. And also when you get into a camp situation, it's like social convention goes out the window, right? People that wouldn't act that way normally do. So I would say that for a long time I didn't have any voice, and it really killed like my self-esteem. And I think the only thing that kept me as an engineer as long as I had is stubbornness and too much pride to quit. Now, as I kind of have hit my rock bottom, I've quit jobs over being passed over from management roles or being misled about roles I was taking. I've kind of got nothing left to lose. So as I've kind of hit the rock bottom, never felt like I was heard, now I just don't give a shit. I don't know if I can say that here. And now I'll say what I think. And it's been funny to me to see the shift now. And when I stand up and say, you know what? You want to go have that conversation in front of your supervisor and see how that guy changes in his attitude towards me. When before I'd be like, ha, 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 that's so funny. And then I just walk away and like die inside, right? So that's kind of, I do think it's really, it's a very good parallel between the two. And it would be worthwhile to speak to women in engineering and see if there's things that could be learned from them.
Thank you.
Hope that answers your
Anything
question.
further?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Carolyn?
There's a couple of things I want to address, and then I have a question. So I want to talk about tough skin. You're absolutely right. It's a tough job. And it's tough for all of us. I think more so for women. We've been kind of socialized. If you're aggressive, or if you speak out, you're aggressive. It's inappropriate. You need to be humble and all that. And I face that. I mean, my degree is in social work. So I'm used to a lot of public speaking, very confident in it. But I'm used to people giving me hugs, not people hating me.
Right.
So it was a real challenge when I came in here because everything I stood, especially as a minister, everything you say, half the people are going to think you're right and half the people are going to think you're wrong. And the most vocal voices are the ones that think you're wrong.
Yes.
So I want to say that that's not a fallacy, that is reality. But I also, when I went to Ottawa, what I noticed here, so I was traumatized a bit at the beginning. Like, why don't people like me? What's going on? I've never had so many enemies my whole life. But then I went to Ottawa, and I watched Parliament there, and I really seen the aggression and the inappropriateness. And I came back here, and I looked at it and thought, consensus government is a little bit different. We're not as aggressive. There is chance for working together. So my question is, fundraising was an obstacle for me as well.
Okay.
So there's two things. Fundraising was an obstacle at the beginning. I was a single mom. I worked for a nonprofit. I many times went without paychecks because there wasn't enough money to go around, and my employees came first. So I spent most of my money and my visa maxed. There was no money. It was a visa maxed. Thank God for somebody giving me a visa. Now I'm cursing because I've never paid it down. But what I'm saying is that over the years now, my skin has toughened. I don't take so much offense to the criticism. I kind of put it where it needs to be. I would not go in. I am going to put my name forward if I'm successful. I'm not going to rack my visa again. I don't even have room to rack it anyway. I will be better at fundraising because I've learned those skills over the time.
Right.
So I'm saying some of that takes time. But my question is really around, because I see a difference in our government. And so consensus government in ideology means working together. And I'm going to tread on thin ice here now. I think, in my own personal opinion, that women, we've been socialized again to try to compromise, to work as a unit. We think about families. We think about all of us. So I'm, again, treading on. I think that in general, we are more consensus in our nature. I think that men, and that socialization have been like, you're the breadwinner, you need to get the job, doesn't matter what it is, you need to take care of your family, are born more, or raised, socialized more aggressive. So my question is, within a consensus government, which ideology says that we work together, do you think that if we had equal representation, if we did have that magic 50%, do you think that we could change how politics is, and that women would influence how we treat each other in the house.
Yes. Yeah, because
there's chance.
life is about balance. And really, when we look around our society now, everyone wants to live in these extremes of black and white. It's this or that, you're good or you're bad, and it's really not. And so when you look at your government and it's not balanced, that's the problem, because now you don't have half of the people's voices being heard at the table. And so I do feel like, yes, I feel like women in many ways, and again, I try to stay away as well too, because I've been so stereotyped the other way that I try not to stereotype as well. But I do think, yes, we are raised and socialized to be a lot more collaborative. I come back to my sister as a consultant as well, and she's a partner, a young partner in her company. And she says when she gets praise about a project, she's always like, here's my team, here's this guy, here's these people, everybody contributed. And she says when she looks at her colleagues and they get complimented, it was, yes, I was amazing at that project. So I do think that, and again, I don't think it's an inherent physical thing that women are this way or that way, but I do think society has raised that women are more collaborative. I work on, the rare times where I do work with more women in the field, I do feel it is a more of a collaborative project. It is more, let's listen to everybody's voices. It's not, I'm the project manager, shut up and just do what I say. And I've heard that a lot from others. Yeah. So I hope that answers your
That
question.
was,
Yeah.
and it gave me a little bit of hope. So.
Yes, and this gives me hope. I will say back to you, thank you so much, because, you know, like, it does give me a lot of hope, and I have seen in a year or two with the whole Me Too movement that this is now, and I've seen it in the engineers, and that was very, very funny to watch at a conference in Ottawa, the National Association of Consulting Engineering Companies, to see all these, old white men having a conversation about, wow, we have a board that's all old white men, and how do we go about changing that? And they're not really doing anything yet, because all those board people are elected from the different provinces and territories. So until they want to sit there and dictate to the Northwest Territories, you have to put a woman in, you know, that's not going to happen. But it was a real shift. I have never heard gender conversations at an engineering conference in my life. So it was, yeah, so I will credit the Me Too movement with at least making this dialogue start, even if it's not moving fast enough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good, thank you very much, Katrina.
Thank you.
On this point, I have to say that this week I was really struck by the news release that came from the 3 women mayors, Nunavut, Hay-River, and Yellowknife, about the Polytechnic University. Not so much the content of the news release, but the fact that that there was a joint news release. Never before can I remember a time there was a joint news release, and I thought that it really spoke to how women are willing to work collaboratively, often more so than men. So I thought that was an interesting development out of the fall elections, where we have women now in leadership positions who weren't in them before. So next, yeah, please come and take a seat. Yeah. Tell us your name when you start.
Yep, sure. My name's Kate Reed. I work for the GNWT. I'm just talking for me. I don't have a great story like that. I have a few points that I think will add on the discussion, so I wrote it down because that's how I think, but and then I'd be happy to talk to you about questions you might have afterwards. So thank you for this opportunity. I read the discussion paper, and I find it, on the whole, to be somewhat misleading and of limited utility. A factual example that popped out at me was the percentage of votes garnered by women in the 2015 election on pages 6 and 7 is presented sort of in a misleading format. For example, Miss Grunnenwagen in Hay River South was defeated by 98 votes, whereas Miss Fullerton in Frame Lake lost by 15 votes in a very close race between 4 candidates. So they're very different situations where the context of those ballots isn't really explored, and I find that kind of misleading. In regards to the Samoan model, well, I find it interesting, and it's very interesting to contemplate. I still find myself concerned that the discussion paper doesn't really speak to the cultural context of why or how the Samoan people came to this choice. It doesn't state as to whether the strategy was most preferable to the majority of the population in the nation, or but it curiously does note that more women ran after the measure was enacted, and perhaps in opposition to the measure itself. So without that necessary context, I find proposing a similar model in our unique culture and context in the NWT disconcerting at best. So the Adding additional seats in case of scenario where the threshold of 20% and later 30% representation not being met strikes me as slightly paternalistic, and I also fear that such a measure would be conducive to naysayers and at worst misogynists, as we were talking a little bit about bullying earlier, who could latch onto this as a saved seat issue and bring to the forefront of the discussion at any time that a member in such a seat were to make a political misstep, or they could harass that member for being the token woman, and should anybody find their actions disagreeable. And it's a point of contention to latch onto, and it puts that person, that individual woman, in that seat of a place of constantly having to prove her worth. And I find that would provide endless potential to delegitimize her term both to her colleagues and the public. And that's something that just really stuck out at me from the discussion paper. I think the committee would find more support from citizens, and specifically women who are considering running for office, more pragmatic, useful accommodations that could be implemented and or highlighted to women considering putting their name forward in an election. And I know there's a campaign school for women, and I'm so glad that they're expanding and enhancing what they offer. I'm really excited to see what that looks like. My friends and I, when I was discussing this paper with them, we could think of several examples off the top of our heads that would be a pragmatic solution or two. So women who work full-time and are hesitant to leave their jobs to run in case they don't win for fiscal reasons, for childcare reasons, for whatever reasons, they might be better served by legislation that allows for time off from their job with a guarantee that your job is still there after the election, even if you don't win, right? And this could be a boon to politically passionate women who have to consider that financial security of both themselves and their families. And unpaid leave might not be unrealistic. That's something that could be worked out. But if you know your job is safe, that might make a big difference and have that capacity to move forward and make that decision. The election period from nominations to close of polls, I believe, is 29 days, around there. And having that hold on your job could help more women choose to run, and it would benefit any gender, really. I'd like to see the committee also choose to boost actions like the promotion of ability to collect contributions for a campaign, as was discussed earlier, or the fact that you can claim childcare as an election expense while campaigning, which is how I interpret the act, but I could be wrong, but there seems to be room for wiggle. And all this to say, I hope that you can focus on realistic accommodations instead of rethinking the whole process, the democratic process of one person, one vote, one candidate that wins. I ask that you please instead choose accommodations that benefit women at a tangible level and don't add what I kind of consider pity seats. Someone who I'm personally considering running for office at some point, maybe in 2023, and I don't want to take a seat like that. If that was the situation I found myself in, I would decline the seat. So, thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you willing to answer questions?
Sure.
Okay. I think I'm the one who knows the most about the Samoan model, so that's a good point. There isn't very much cultural context in there at all. It's a patriarchal society in which the parliament is populated by hereditary chiefs who are men. Women there didn't receive the vote until 1990. Okay. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, working with the United Nations Development Program, went to Samoa and some other South Pacific Island nations to talk about representation by women. And it was a collaborative effort that ultimately resulted in a referendum, which the population voted on and adopted these temporary special measures. It is not a perfect comparison to the NWT by any means. I think what the speaker was interested in was that they had this problem and we had this problem, and this is how they fixed it.
Right.
But it's not necessarily equivalent. What we are trying to do here is look at two sort of streams. One is policy policy changes, rule changes, things like claiming childcare as an election expense. And the other is the possibility of legislative changes, which would be required if we were going to guarantee seats to people, or we were going to guarantee jobs for people, or time off without pay and so on. So we were looking at the two streams at once. It's not one or the other, it's both. And I'm happy to tell you, and for everyone who's listening, that the Chief Electoral Officer told us when she presented her last report that she accepted receipts for childcare expenses. And so I don't think that is explicit in the Act, but in practice she will take it because she understands that for some women, that's the only way they're going to be able to campaign is if they have care for their children. So I just wanted to make those couple of clarifications. I really appreciate your comments. You've given us lots to think about. I'll ask the committee if they have any questions or comments for Kate. Corey?
Hi, Corey.
Hi, Kate. Good to see you here. Not really a question, but maybe looking for your thoughts. Appreciate that you shared your opinion on the direct appointment concept. Dave was kind enough to share his views earlier on a run a man and woman in each riding. So these are initiatives that would, in my view, be great if you actually had the candidates that want to, run and or be in those roles. So I think ultimately still what the challenge remains is actual barriers to get women to actually become candidates in the first place. And so I'd like to maybe learn a little bit more from you or understand a little bit more from you of what do you think some of the challenges or the, say, limitations or barriers are for you to consider? You've mentioned that you're going to potentially consider being a candidate in the future.
Yes.
And so what would be some of those things that you would consider barriers?
Well, financial, everything that was discussed, the previous commenter, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, brought up about financial, about issues if you have child care issues. I don't, but I know many women who are interested in politics do. I think that having that particular childcare assessment, that if you are the successful candidate, that there would be childcare provided and in the assembly while you work or whatever that might look like could be considered. I also think that gender is not a binary and it's a spectrum, so I don't really agree with the 1 and 1 because that's not the reality we live in on planet Earth, at least in my opinion. So I don't think the 1 woman, 1 man candidate is an excellent solution in that way. But if what would keep me from running in office, I think it's a personality thing. I think because I am a stubborn person who doesn't have a lot of worry about what people think about me, that has a lot to play into it. And I don't know if that's something that you can teach or encourage in people, but I am very passionate about taking the campaign for School for Women and promoting it amongst people that I know that have any interest. And I think that the Assembly should do everything they can to promote such programs and think about new programs and support Status Women Council in creating new programs that might help people in all of the communities of the NWT.
All right, thank you. If I can add one more thing?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what is it that would be actually appealing to you to be a politician? And I should have asked this of Katrina as well when she was here, because that intrigues me. Because I think that one of the things that I don't hear often enough about becoming a politician, not necessarily women in leadership, but becoming a politician is you just don't hear women saying, I want to be a politician. We have a youth parliament here every year.
Yes.
And I have to admit that it's a great thing to see that it's a minimum 2/3, more like 3/4 of young women that partake. And we have the opportunity as MLAs to sit down with them in advance and have good discussions with them. And ask any one of them, you're here today, are you aspiring to be a politician? Almost none of
They'll say
them
no.
say that they're aspiring to be a politician. So I'm interested to learn from women in particular, because of the subject matter that we're working on here, as to what would inspire you to become a politician.
I guess I'd never framed it that way in my mind, and I don't think I would consider running for office if I lived in any other place in Canada. I think consensus government is amazing and something to be upheld for as long as we possibly can, simply because of the previous discussion that you did have a little bit earlier with Katrina, is that it's a conversation, it's a back and forth, it's kind compared to Ottawa. I am interested in big picture issues that touch everybody who lives here, and it's the capacity to help people in a way that I don't feel that I can do if I'm not in a position like that. So that's what's interesting to me. I'm not interested in being the person that's in the media or being the person who has this particular outlook in political life. It's that I want to help people at a bigger scale than I can currently in my life, the way that it's structured now in office, public office, and the Legislative Assembly of the NWT speaks to me that way.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Carolyn?
So I have a comment and then two questions.
Sure.
Okay with that? A couple comments. I really appreciate your words.
Thank you.
A lot of them are things that I've thought about as well. So I really appreciate that you are an employee of the government of the Northwest Territories. My questions are, do you work in policy? And if you don't work in policy, can you ask for a job to get transferred to policy?
I work with Michelle. I work with Michelle in ENR. She's our policy manager, and I'm advisor for legislation and legal affairs.
Good, okay, you're in the right place. Until you get into policy.
Thank you.
That's my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other questions for Kate? If not, thank you very much for making your presentation and remarks. Thanks. Welcome, thank you for coming to talk to us. Tell us your name, please.
So my name is Alexandra Giroux. I have no interest in running for politics, but what I did do today is I did sit down and read through a couple of the reports regarding guaranteed seats for women. And that actually worries me a little bit. Like Katrina, I also come from an engineering background. I am a mechanical engineer, professional engineer. And one of the things that I saw a lot going through my own education, luckily I have not seen it since graduating, but the idea of when I saw seeing guaranteed seats for women, what I see is you got the job because you're a woman. Mm-hmm. You got it. Let me rephrase that. You got the job because you're a girl and you make them look good. And that worries me. I really do want to see more women in legislature. I do want to see more women in policy development, in positions as MLAs, as premier, as ministers in the federal government. But saying that we need guaranteed seats for women worries me. I think that, based on my own experience, I think that things such as measures like mentorship, campaign schools, providing support for childcare, for having some kind of job stability to go back to, especially if you run, and knowing that if you run and you don't get elected, is there a job for me to go back to so that I can continue to support my family? I think overall, there will be much more support, and it makes that easier for women to say, I'm going to run for this, than here's a seat that you'll get because you're a woman. And again, I'm saying this because going through school, that's what I heard, is you got this job, you got this co-op job because you're a girl. You'll make them look good. It looks good when they hire a woman engineer. And I will say, I have not heard that since graduating, but when you hear it when you're first starting out, whether it's in engineering, whether it's in law, whether it's in politics, whether it's in healthcare, you start thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Because all of a sudden it makes you different. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for making that point. Are you willing to answer questions if there are any?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Alexander?
Thanks.
Corey?
Thank you. Thank you for presenting. What do you sense when people say, or some folks will say that, maybe what has to happen is that this tokenism might have to go through a phase of doing that in order to get to that next stage of getting past this stage of flux where the tokenism thing is the thing, and getting to this place where we finally don't have to recognize that anymore. We have equal representation, and now we can all get back to normalcy.
I don't think it's a bad thing to be setting goals. I think we do need to set goals to say, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, whether that's 30%, whether that's 50%. But I think also recognizing that those women who do run you don't want to get the seat because you're a woman. You want to make sure that if you run and you lose, then I personally, again, I have no desire to go into politics, but personally, if I lost an election fair and square and then got told, oh wait, because we still have a seat for you, I'd be a little bit worried about that. It wouldn't necessarily make me comfortable sitting in that seat.
I guess the question would be, and I have no idea how the Samoan situation operates at all, but I can imagine that certainly while the initial feelings of those who might have, or who did get appointed would share in similar feelings, I would say even in Somalia, but that to some way or some degree, those women are really at the forefront of breaking down the barriers and are probably really contributing significantly to policy and legislation and laws and that sort of thing. And I guess, maybe this is just more of a comment that I'm saying, but that's maybe part of that flux or stage of having to go through something like that in order to take a big leap so that society can kind of just get ahead, or because honestly, what you're saying is what I hear most people saying, and that they wouldn't want that kind of appointment. But
I think from what was said earlier about the cultural context of it being a very patriarchal society, I think maybe in that case it had, and again, I have zero political background. I'm not into policy, I'm not into legislature, but what I see is we're already ahead of them. And women here have had the vote for much longer, and we've had women as premiers, we've had women as ministers, we've had women in these positions. So I think we would get much more, we would move forward more by increasing the supports. And I also do think that there is I may have said this already, but I do think that there is a difference between a quota and saying we must meet this number, or this is a goal that we're working for, and we might not get it in the next election, but we're going to find out from those women who do get elected what worked, what didn't work. Next time around, we change it. And I do think there is that difference.
All right. I appreciate your giving us your input today, and it seems to me that the increase for supports and finding ways in which to increase the amount of candidates would be some of the focus that we have to consider. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments for Alexandra? No? Thank you very much for making your points.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome. What's your name?
My name is Leah Lamoureux.
Leah Lamoureux.
Yes. In my professional capacity, I work in public education, and I've done that for 15 years in the Northwest Territories, and I really like it a lot. I also have 2 children, and I appreciate the tangible things that you've been talking about and that people have been raising. My question is a little bit different, though. I'm curious if the committee has considered the marketing strategy for attracting women in terms of thinking about transferable skills. When I hear women say they're not going to run, I hear them say, oh, I don't know what the job is. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know. But if we're talking about women who have families or don't have families or work in the home or outside of the home, all of these women have skills. And of course the men do too. And I feel that if there was a bit of a focus on how skills can be transferred into what the job is in a meaningful way, with specifics, it could open up opportunity for discussion. I understand, I have a really very, very beginning working understanding of things of groups like Daughters of the Vote, Campaign School, and Youth Parliament. But I'm just curious if you've considered actually discussing the transferable skills. I've heard you say public speaking. That's a clear skill. What are the other skills that a successful candidate would be required to use on a day-to-day basis in their role? And I feel that could break some of the barriers, some of the big mystery down, and make possibly politics more approachable for everyday citizens. It's kind of like a question and a comment and an idea all rolled into one, because that's what teachers do.
Good. Thank you very much. I understand what you're saying, and I see lots of potential in exploring that. I've had a number of careers in my life, and what I often say is that I have a skill set. And it can be applied in a number of different ways. I've been a reporter, I've been a fundraiser, I've worked for a nonprofit, and now I'm here. And so I think that's a really interesting idea, because there are some common skills among all those things that I've done.
Yes.
And that may make it more accessible to women than thinking whatever they think, their primary role here will be. I think you're right. I think there's not a lot of understanding actually about what it is. And I think that women default to, I don't really know about that. I don't think I have the qualifications.
Or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough, or whatever. I have children, I have all these demands on my time, but that means they have time management skills, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of really practical soft skills and hard skills that you need in every role that you take on as a human being. And so I just wonder if something's getting kind of lost in outer space or wherever, where we forget we're all people and we're all here to do better things for the territory. And so why not take advantage of just helping people understand the skills that are needed, and then they can do a self-inventory and be like, oh, wait, I do that already, I do this already, I do that already, and then figure out the tangibles in terms of money and if they have to work through childcare, whatever the other things are. But I think it comes from a belief that you can do the job. If you know what the job is and you know what the skills are, and you can check that against what your own skills are, maybe that could be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you mind answering any questions
Sure.
if my colleagues have any? Questions or comments, colleagues? Carolyn?
I speak too much. That's one of my downfalls. I really appreciate your comment. I agree. We're in the process of developing northernizing our campaign schools, so I'm taking some of this also for that reason. And I want to share, you're absolutely right. I was a street kid, I've been a waitress, I've been a chambermaid, I've been a social worker, I've been administrating NGOs, I administrated childcare centers. When I got in, I thought, I don't know anything about politics. I know nothing. And I was scared. And then I got housing. And I went, whoa, this is right up my alley. And then I got education.
Right.
And I went, whoa, this is child development. This is right up my alley. So I think you've hit a point that I haven't heard, and I think you're right that we need to look at that, because our skills are transferable in everything, in engineering, ITI, I think, no matter what skill is out there. Customer service, the person at Walmart, what better place than politicians are about customer service? So, I think it's a great idea. I think we need to look at that within our campaign schools as well, because I think it's something that we need to say. We women are really hard on ourselves usually, and I'm not saying men aren't either. I don't know. I don't have that, but I think that we have to show women. I agree that you have it. You have that skill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anything further for Leah? Thank you. Oh, Corey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, probably just more of a comment in that, first of all, I appreciate you raising the transferable skills piece, because I think, honestly, this is probably the first time I've had to really kind of give that any thought in terms of, what it is that I think all of us on occasion always get asked, well, what got you into politics? And, of course, every time an election comes up, it's a bit of a time when we get checked for our qualifications to be a politician. And I like to suggest to people that, there is not any qualifications required. It doesn't matter what walk of life or what positions you've held in the past. I think if you have a bit of a vision and a simple idea to want to do better for the territory or your community or what have you, then that qualifies you. And sometimes that might be a bit of a barrier. Some folks think that, well, maybe I just either don't have the education, or I don't have the life skills, or I don't have the professional experience that would qualify me to be considered to be a politician. So, but then the point that you raise is, doing a better job from our end, I suppose, in marketing and promoting what transferable skills could really work well in these roles over here would be really good to know, because I think that'll put the rest of the committee on thinking mode about that for the next little while, and you would certainly want to see that kind of be at least a piece in the election campaign workshops. That would be a great piece to have in there. So one thing I also tell folks when they ask is that while there are clearly expectations that the public have of you when you're a public representative, there is no job description when you walk through the front door. They don't hand you one and say, oh, by the way, here's what you got to do. It's up to each representative to evolve their positions into how they best see fit to represent the public at large. And so I guess I just put this out there for a little bit of commentary for those folks in the room and those who might be watching and listening, that those are some of the things that you got to be aware of and adjust to, I suppose, if you're giving it some thought to run. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Corey. Tom?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Because I know what you do for a living, I would say you probably have the skills to do a job as MLA.
I'm in my dream job already. I'm good.
Right. But because I think hard work is probably the key to, I've always just looked at MLA's job in two ways. That's to work hard and to have a vision of trying to improve the lives of people in the Northwest Territory. And if you could develop a vision of what is needed in the territory, I think that it gets you halfway to achieving a goal, if that's something that interests you. And then, of course, I know, like I've seen how hard teachers work, and I think that it's very similar to what an MLA is required to do. We feel a lot of calls. You probably know which communities I represent.
You represent my community.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of, there's two different Aboriginal groups in my riding, and of course, the employment rates in my riding are in the 40% category. So everybody is needs some sort of help socially. So you get calls daily, all the time. Even when someone passes away, people need help.
Yes.
It's on just about every issue. If somebody misses the cycle of payments through income support, if somebody's going on holidays and they forget to process, that's hardship for people. People go through a lot of hardship, and to be able to understand and have a vision to improve their lives and work hard, I think are the keys to getting to, I guess, to becoming an MLA. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anything further? Thank you very much for coming, Leah. Hi, Jolene.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. A little bit nervous.
Okay. You've done harder things.
Maybe. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for having this important discussion. This is a topic that I am extremely impassioned about, and I have actually done a lot of research into this particular topic. I think that by starting out with quotas or goals are exactly just that. They're just goals. They're not anything that is enforceable. It's not something that is that there's a whole body of research that shows that by enforcing quotas, for women in politics, you don't actually see a substantial improvement. And so, in my opinion, I think in the Northwest Territories, what we need is radical change. We need guaranteed representation. There are over 100 countries throughout the world that have implemented guaranteed representation, yet Canada is so far behind that we have examples of British Columbia, where there are 3 plebiscites to implement guaranteed representation, and we continue to see them fail. And the example of Nunavut came up earlier, and that was an opportunity to become a national leader, and it was unfortunately not supported by the Nunavut Mi'ut. I believe that this is the Northwest Territories' opportunity to become a leader on a national stage, and then to eventually be seen internationally. The fact that there are over 100 countries that have implemented guaranteed representation does not include states. It does not include provinces or territories or municipalities. So there are, I guarantee, many more out there. And I think one of the most common arguments against guaranteed representation is what was discussed earlier, the fact that it would be seen as though women are just given their seats, that you don't feel that you have earned your opportunity. I personally believe the opposite. I don't know this for a fact, but I believe at one point there was a committee similar to yours that may have been struck that sat around and talked about the P1 hiring process. So what is the official terminology? Affirmative action hiring process. And a committee discussed that, and there was radical change made at that point to make sure that Indigenous people were brought into the public sector. And I do not believe that, for me, as an Indigenous woman in a senior management position, I don't ever think to myself, I got this job because I'm an Aboriginal person or because I'm a woman. I got that job because I earned it. And I'm also an Aboriginal woman. And so I don't think that if I were to ever run for politics, which I do have an ambition to eventually do, I would never think to myself, I got this job because I'm a woman. I got this job because I'm an Aboriginal person. No, I earned that job. And so I think it's extremely important to acknowledge that, because that really is, like, in all of the bodies of research that I've done or that I've conducted, that is the most common argument against guaranteed representation. There's also in a whole body of research, I keep using the terminology body of research, that shows that instituting things like campaign schools, while they are they are beneficial, they don't in fact produce the results that legislators or that politicians are looking to actually achieve. So as a result, you have this symbolic discussion with women saying, these are some of the things that you can do, these are, you know, some of the skills that you need to have, these are some incentives that we can give you. But in fact, at the end of it, all of that, it's not producing significant results. I think that one of the things that could be considered or looked at is the example of Italy. Italy implemented guaranteed representation, I believe, for one term, and at the end of that term, they decided to discontinue that, to discontinue guaranteed representation. And what they actually saw, which is interesting, because the naysayers were saying, oh, well, the women only got elected because the women were guaranteed these positions. What they saw was that in future elections after that, the female candidate continued to maintain her seat. Thank you. And as a result, because they had the before, the after, and the time of guaranteed representation, what they actually saw was that the women who were successfully elected ended up winning those positions over men who were incumbents most often, and those men were people with lesser education, lesser experience. So in fact, those women were the more qualified candidate. And so I think that that is something that the Northwest Territories, or that as a committee, I would recommend that you guys take a look at. The last thing that I wanted to mention is some of the research that I've done also shows that there are countries that have implemented guaranteed representation that have used the slow track. So that slow track is using the campaign schools and using quotas, and there has been slow improvement over time, so Sweden being an example. Whereas if you look at countries that have fast-tracked it, mostly in South America, those countries just immediately went that radical route and put in that guaranteed 50% representation. And as a result, they have a better system of politics, I believe, in those countries. So that's all I have to say. And I don't know if you can tell, but I really am very passionate about this.
That's coming through. Thanks very much for your remarks. And so they resonate with me because temporary special measures are supposed to be temporary. And so it is what you say, a radical, like a fast track approach, where we would jumpstart the representation of women into those goals rather than waiting for things to evolve, because things haven't been evolving. That's the simple fact. There has not been an increase in representation above 3 since division. There's, I wonder if you've come across in your research a sort of a line of thought about if you can see it, you can be it. This is something now that's being discussed by women's political organizations around the world, that if women see women as politicians, it's not just Caroline and I in that house, there's 6 of us, that they more readily see themselves doing that job. Is that something that you've looked at too?
I haven't, but I definitely will.
Okay. And is there any research that you would like to share with us? It sounds like.
Sure.
Yeah. If you'd like to send me an email, that would be awesome. I would be happy to share it with the committee members, and we could.
For sure.
Look at that in more detail. Yeah, thank you. So are you okay to answer some questions? Okay. Questions or comments for Jolene? Lou?
Yeah, thanks, Jolene. To reach the 50%, would you advocate the model that Dave Nickerson proposed with
Yes.
a limited number of seats, smaller number, but 1 woman and 1 man elected in each?
Yes, I would envision the constituencies the boundaries becoming larger, and then identical to what was proposed earlier, 1 seat for a female and 1 seat for a male. I don't think at this point that there would need to be more MLAs introduced into the Legislative Assembly, unless it would be to ensure that there is that equality, but.
Thank you. Anything further?
Just as a comment, I don't even know if you can ask candidates.
Pardon me?
I don't even know if you could ask candidates at an election time whether they were male or female. I'm not sure if you could.
Oh, I don't know either.
And someone mentioned that it's not a binary choice or a binary option anymore, so I think that might be a problem, or someone might refuse to be identified as one or the other.
Very valid.
I see that as problematic.
Yeah.
Lou? Carolyn?
It was interesting, your comments, because I've heard a lot of women saying, I don't want to be a token, especially Indigenous women. Just clarifying that I'm Métis as well, and I have that issue myself. I've worked hard at this position, I've been working hard, and I would have some issues with being a token. But I want to divert a bit, because we are working on the campaign school, and if it's okay, MLA Green and myself both went through that school, and for me, it was the deciding factor. So if you're willing, I would really appreciate it if you could, my special advisor, Sabette, is in the back here. If you're willing to give her a name, I would really like if you could give us spend some time with her if you're willing, and you could talk about your research on campaign schools.
For sure.
If they're not working, then we need to look at that. That would break my heart. But I'd like to know what your research said and how we can, if we're going to do it, how we can make it better. So if you're willing to give Sabette your name at the end, I'd appreciate that.
For
as well.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any further questions or comments for Jolene? Thank you very much,
Thank
Jolene,
you.
for sharing your points with us. Floor is open.
Excuse me, sir, are you at the media?
Who are you?
Oh, shocking. Thanks, Greg.
So now you have to clarify that and say who he is, please.
Please, just have a seat at the table, David. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. It's this hearing's been interesting. I was babysitting for a friend and watching it streaming, and you know, a number of the points that have been brought up. And there's a few things I just wanted to touch on related to both women running and making the election system more accessible in general. Oh, sure. David Waseltsu. I run Open NWT. It does open government, access to government information, elections information, ledge information, procurement information stuff. I've been advocating for more accessible elections for a number of years and have some experience having attempted a run before. Some of the comments that have come up before is access to money, and I know there's been some discussion about that. One of the things that's done at both municipal levels, most provincial levels, and the federal level is reimbursements of expenses. That's something that's come up here. I I know because I brought it up. It hasn't really been considered, mostly because the arguments against it at the time from the CEO, from the two CEOs, were related to the complication of doing it, that it's complex, because now you have to actually check and see what the expenses were. You have to make sure they're valid. Are all of the expenses that we allowed before going to be okay? We don't want people buying things just for campaigns that aren't perhaps valid expenses if we're reimbursing it. There's a number of pieces. But I think all of those are achievable goals to match. I mean, it's a little bit of work, and it's been done everywhere else in Canada, a number of places, and federally. And so it's something worth doing. I mean, that makes money much less of an issue. At the same time, I mean, the costs of running in the Territory are really different between ridings. I mean, when you're in Yellowknife, Hay River, some MLAs or candidates spend quite close to the limit, 25 to 30 grand, occasionally outside of the major centers, but less so. That's a lot of money. Even if you're getting half of that back, I mean, that's still 15 grand. That's got to come in through donations or out of pocket or your visa or whatever. And that's quite a high amount. A suggestion I would make is to lower that amount so that the total expenses isn't 30 grand. It can be brought to 20. I mean, if you look at the last 3 or 4 elections, the average for a winning seat of spending has been something like $15,000. So spending 30 grand doesn't happen to win anything. But having that out there as the upper liar does certainly set a tone, and that could easily scare somebody off. Having that number lower, in answer to the small community question about travel, in the ridings that have a whole lot of small communities that's perhaps not accessible by road, I believe you could certainly leave the extra portion available as travel, and perhaps even have that at a higher amount of reimbursable. I mean, if people are trying to run, a big part of it is being able to get to communities. If you're running in Inuktitut, it's really difficult to visit all the communities with which you're trying to represent and talk to. Obviously, there have to be some checks and balances to make sure people are running legitimate campaigns and not simply trying to spend some money and travel around their region. But I think these are all achievable things, but they also make the system more accessible. Things like it's heard it earlier, but I mean, childcare expenses and those sorts of things, I believe are covered and have been in the past, and that's good. I think the explanation about what's covered and not isn't always very clear. Trying to find information out about running is often you're referred to the Act or a manual, and that's pretty difficult. I mean, the campaign schools are a great idea, but it's just one school. I mean, it's one weekend. If you can't go that weekend, or you decide afterwards, or you've decided before, or something else, then that same information isn't always available to you, and it should be. So there should be a lot more information about how to run, what's involved. You shouldn't ever get referred to reading the Act, frankly. It's really frustrating when somebody gets told, well, you got to check the Act. Most people running aren't lawyers in the NWT and don't have those resources. And the Act isn't written in a terribly plain language way. Further to that, about our style of voting. So right now we elect 19 MLAs in a consensus system of government, which is fantastic. But we don't elect people in a consensus manner. We elect people using a first past the post system. Whoever gets the most votes in a riding wins the election. And what we've looked at in other jurisdictions, both around the world, some places in Canada have talked about it, is voter reform in things like ranked balloting. And that leads to a more consensus candidates. So rather than just taking the one that has the top number of votes, it's banked on a ranked voting, much like, say, city council voting. The idea being that you could have a first, second, third choice. And that might lead to more consensus building candidates, which in some cases maybe women, in some cases just maybe other people, and certainly broaden the electoral scope of who gets in. It hasn't worked as far as referendums go in BC recently or Ontario, and PEI has been close, but they also use a different form of government. So they're using a party system of government, they're doing a very different thing in their government, whereas we have a consensus system. So we have a consensus approach in the ledge, but we don't have one to get there. And I think that's a bit of a barrier for people getting engaged as well, and that could cause some differences. So I think there's a lot of tweaks we can make to the overall system that would broaden and open up the electoral system in general in the NWT and change it for the better. So I think there's lots of room to do that, whether it's about expenses or whether it's about the actual system. I don't think any of these are huge, and none of them would require tons and tons of money. And you know what, if they don't work, a lot of these changes can simply be rolled back the next time. I mean, the NWT is a pretty small jurisdiction. It's easy to correct for some of these things and try them out. And I would encourage members of the committee and of the whole House in general just to try stuff. To some degree, even just small things, do whatever you can do to open up the system with respect to this particular matter and in general. I mean, we can make changes to the Elections Act. There's lots of things that can happen even within this last year. I mean, there's still lots of time left if all MLAs agree on making some changes to adjust the system. So I really hate to see this go into a report, a very large report that then gets put on a shelf and everyone talks about the great report that was done, and then nothing changes. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for making those points, David. Do you mind answering some questions?
Sure.
It's my understanding that the incentives, the financial incentives, turn around how much of the popular vote the candidate receives as an indication of how hard they've worked on their campaign, and then they get maybe not all but a portion of the money back. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know that from an incentive argument, and I wouldn't be, frankly, personally, very comfortable with an incentive based on the exact percentage. Most reimbursements programs work on, they have a set minimum, so you have to have gotten at least 10% of the vote in the riding, or 20%, or whatever a reasonable percentage is, just to show that you've run a legitimate campaign.
Yeah.
The idea isn't that you can say I'm running a campaign, spend 30 grand, not knock on a door or do anything, not get a vote, and then get 15 grand back. So there's just some sort of check and balance on that. But I think that doesn't need to be an especially high bar. And if you lower the money amount, then it also makes it much cheaper to do that.
Right. Thank you very much. Questions for Lou?
Yeah, David, thank you for your presentation. With respect to the idea of ranked voting, you'd have to have fewer seats, though. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think. I think you could.
I mean, you'd have 19 winners, and then.
Well, in each riding. So if you had a ranked voting in a per riding basis, so for example, in your riding, there would have been a ranked ballot, and the three of you that were running.
Oh, I see,
four,
okay.
You'd rank between them, and then whoever in the end actually had a majority of the votes.
Oh, so you're talking about first choice, second choice, third choice, rather than adding on.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry,
okay,
a ranked in that system where whoever, so the winner actually has the majority and is a consensus candidate for the riding.
Okay.
David, I mean, that was a question, I'm curious about this rating system. I thought is it rank or rating?
Rank.
Right, okay, so the ranking system. So my question is, would that only work with a campaign that has more than two people that are running for election? How would that work with there's only two?
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. David?
Thanks. If there are only two candidates in a ranked balloting system, generally it'd be the first past the post, because the lower one would drop off in the second choice. If you had nobody indicate a second choice, because you don't have to indicate, you can just pick one person. Presumably it would be the candidate left, because the first one would have dropped off.
Can I expand on that? So then my next question is, would that make a difference in people deciding which ridings they want to run? Like, if I'm deciding to run for a campaign, would I pick an open riding where there's potential of 4 or 5 or 6 people, or would I take the safe route that it's 1 or 2? I'm just wondering if that, and so how is that equitable? I'm trying to understand, I'm not challenging, I'm trying to get my head around it.
I think the electoral math between being in a riding that has an incumbent, that has maybe less people running, versus an open riding that has more people running, is still fairly similar in that system versus today. If it's one person challenging an incumbent, you obviously would have to hope that the incumbent wasn't terribly popular, and you could beat the incumbent. There's always going to be an incumbent advantage in any election. You could have 4 or 5 people running against an incumbent. In an open riding, the math is always a little bit easier, except now there's any number of candidates. I mean, you've had ridings with 9 people running in previous elections, and I don't know if ranked balloting specifically changes the equation of that being one being better than the other. It's going to come down to more people. Smaller elections generally better. There's less chance of vote splitting, and that would be the case in any of those. Although when there's a lot of people running, a ranked balloting perhaps takes away some of the challenges of that, because the lowest candidates would be dropped off and votes reapportioned. And then you'd actually have a candidate that had, say, the majority of the riding support, rather than, say, if you had 9 people running in an average riding in the NWT with, say, 600 votes and 9 people, if they were all split, the winner might only win by a handful of votes and maybe only, say, 90 votes. And there's many more votes against than there are for, which is one of the problems with sort of the first past the post model that we use, because it really doesn't match up to the consensus style of government.
Anything further, Carolyn?
No, thank you. I think you've said.
Any further questions or comments? Corey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. David, I appreciate you sharing these insights, and I still want to be focused in, however, as it relates to the representation of women. And, you identified a few comments with regard to maybe considering more reimbursable election expenses. Lowering the election expendable amount from 30K down to 20K, 15K. And then, of course, maybe even changing the type of voting system from a first past the post to rank system. So what are your thoughts, however, still as it relates to how these types of things would actually boost women in wanting to become candidates? And what is your thoughts on how these maybe proposed changes would lift up those numbers?
Thank you very much for the question. Firstly, I'm not going to presume to say anything's going to make running easier or not for women as a guy. My experience having run as a single parent of a young child and seeing some of the barriers that were there, some of these suggestions come from a place of having recognized some of those barriers are similar, whether it's childcare, whether it's money. There's a number of things that are out there. I think, frankly, beyond something like the Samoan model, any changes that are made will frankly impact. They change the whole system, right? They change everybody running. And even any other system that changes, say the idea of like a Samoan model that impacts just women, that still changes the math on everything else. So there's a number of, I think, you can't make a change that just impacts one part of the electoral system. Any changes that you make will impact the whole system and impact people who are going to run or choose to run, whether it's making it easier, more difficult, anything else. So I think there's a number of ancillary impacts that I don't think it's easy to predict, because you can make all kinds of changes and then see who puts their names forward. And sometimes it's a bit of it's just a bit of luck to see what happens. I mean, you could have 2 people extra, because our numbers are so small, a couple of extra people running really changes the percentages. And, 2 people could have a close relative die in August and decide they're not going to run in the fall. I mean, all kinds of things can happen. And it's really hard to take an idea of one specific change and see how that one change affects everything. So I think some of those changes, such as lower money, often I've heard money is an issue. Certainly having faced that one, not having a lot of income, being a single parent at the time, it's really expensive to run. I mean, I think I literally ran on my visa. I paid for that for a while. You don't win, it's really expensive. That's tough. And childcare is really tough, because nobody, when you have a young child, my daughter was 5, the difficulty of running, never mind actually winning and having to deal with the job, but running is a really different day-to-day thing. And you're so busy, and that time period, it's almost unimaginable and of what needs are around for a single parent and just the time requirements. And it's really hard, frankly. And so having costs is great. However, I'd even say that, frankly, having babysitter costs isn't going to be the big barrier, because getting babysitters in the evenings is hard to begin with. You're probably not finding a ton that you're paying. You're ideally, hopefully, finding someone that can help you out, because if you're running in a riding where you're knocking on a lot of doors, like Yellowknife, your hours are crazy. You're knocking on doors till all hours of the evening. And that's just tough on a family, plus getting to school and getting kids and doing all of their things. A lot of babysitters aren't giving you receipts. I mean, if you're getting a teenager to babysit for you, not a lot of them are bringing a receipt book with them. And you can encourage them to, and that's helpful, but that's a whole other thing. So even that as a reimbursable expense is useful, yes, but does that actually fix the problem of it's difficult to run when you're a single parent or have young kids in a two-parent family? If you have a couple of young kids, that's also tough. That's not going to do everything, but I think some of these measures can help with that. And I think some of these measures will help, women run, will help people run for office. And I think it levels the playing field a little bit. But at its core, I mean, I can't presume to say what's going to make someone en masse run for office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Any other questions or comments? Kevin?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks, David, for coming and talking about electoral reform again. But I'd like to know what your views are on temporary special measures. We've heard at least a couple of streams of views here from tonight from some of our witnesses. But what are your views as a political junkie on temporary special measures? Thanks.
Name it.
Thank you for the question. With regards to the sort of the temporary special measures, I'm not wild about creating special seats. I think it certainly addresses the issue, and I think that's actually, it's a useful model, but I think it also opens a can of worms and a whole lot of other questions about representation in the Legislative Assembly. There's a lot of, and not to say that they're equal to gender representation, but there's a lot of groups in the NWT that don't have representation in the Legislative Assembly by virtue of not having an MLA of their particular background, status, any number of things. And I think it opens up a whole can of worms around that, and I don't know how to correctly navigate that. So we whether it comes down to particular Indigenous backgrounds being represented, whether it comes down to immigrant groups from Yellowknife, there's quite a number, whether it comes down to language groups. We don't represent that and we don't do anything, but I think creating it could open up that question as to how we're going to organize the Legislative Assembly. And there's not a lot of, whether it's a special measure to create, say, 24 seats was the idea, right? There's a few, I can't remember the exact number.
It could go up to 24 seats. Okay. That would be assuming that 0 women were elected.
Right, so it could go up a number. I think it's certainly one way of doing it, and frankly, just the fact that we're having this discussion is great. As you mentioned, I've been here before talking about some of these things, and what I generally hear is, well, that's not the conversation we're having right now. We're talking about this other stuff. So actually looking at how we can reform the system, just having this idea in the discussion is really good. I think if we do it, I think that's great, and that makes some opportunities, but I'm personally just a little concerned about what that opens up and where those conversations go, and how do we end up representing. How do we do that seat-wise and making sure there's that representation? Well, there's other ways that we can change the system to make it more accessible and get people running. I don't know what the feedback the committee's heard in other municipalities. It would be really interesting, and I look forward to seeing your final report to hear and read more about that. But I'm cautious about that personally.
That's good. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else that we haven't heard from who would like to make some remarks to us? Welcome, Rebecca Alty, our mayor. Or as some people like to say, our mayoress.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lots of different titles that people throw around. I didn't have time to do a presentation, but I've kind of a bit of a brain dump, so hopefully folks can follow along, but some of the things I was just jotting down as others were speaking is this isn't unique to just elected politics. This is also a challenge with boards and in corporations and all that stuff. So I know at the corporate perspective in my previous job, the focus was really making sure that if we want to increase the number of women being successful in getting the job, then we have to make sure that our slates are reflective. So when I take a look at the 2015 election, if only 10 out of the 60 candidates are women, we need to get 20 more women to run. And that's a pretty big number. But so then jumping on to that, it is consensus government. That's great. But at the party politic level, that's where they've got recruiters. And recruiters are now actively looking to make sure that their parties are having that gender balance. So is it, and again, from a corporate perspective too, you've got those headhunters that are going out and actively looking to appoint women to boards and getting those women in leadership positions. So is there that opportunity? Because we also know that women have to be asked a lot. And so being approached by a recruiter, again, it would be a challenge since this is a political position. And so how does this headhunter recruiter go about this? But maybe there's a consultant hired to recruit and coach and point out the different resources, making sure that's well in advance as well. And I applaud the GNWT for doing the campaign schools throughout the term and not just a month before the election's going to begin, because that's, for me at least, where I started thinking about it. It was about 2 months before the election, so I managed to think about it, but if I had wanted to run for mayor, I would have needed a bit more time to get my whole team together. So I think it's good that those campaign schools are going throughout. The other, again, from that HR perspective, is whether there's any exit interviews being had with the female candidates. So why did they run? Demographics, barriers during their campaign, lessons learned, and would they run again? So again, looking at, some folks were just telling me during the campaign about how Pat McMahon ran a couple times before she was successful. So are we having women that put their names forward and never run again? Is there that opportunity to see if there's something that would help the female candidate run again? The other thing is this is very focused on what are the barriers, but perhaps what does success look like? So when women are successful, what are some of the attributing factors and how can we capitalize on that? It was, there's the barriers on a campaign perspective, but again, there's those structural barriers that come with being in office. And for a lot of people, that giving up privacy, the decrease in time you're going to have with your family, the ability to rest when you're sick, that's a challenge when you're campaigning. But one of those big barriers is, as Julie mentioned, or Madam Chair mentioned, was if you see it, you'll be it. And when Justin Trudeau appointed half his cabinet as women, I didn't realize what an impact that was going to have on me. But seeing women represented, and there was the comments that, the women were just getting it to have that gender, but then you look at the women and you look at their resumes and they're not just token women. So I think that whole concept of token women, when you dig just a little scratch of the surface below, it's more, they're quite qualified to be where they are. Another interesting point was the Indigenous Circumpolar Women Leadership Conference that was held here back in 2014. There was an interesting difference between, I believe it was Alaska, but it could have been one of the other circumpolar regions, and the Northwest Territories. And decision makers for women in the Northwest Territories, a lot of the deputy ministers were female, so we do have women in decision-making powers, but not in the elected. And then it was vice versa in Alaska, where women were in the elected positions, but then they weren't in the top bureaucratic positions. So just also kind of taking that into consideration and the impact that can have by having not enough representation at both levels. One of the other barriers that was mentioned tonight is the pay cut, and it's a term position. So that financial insecurity and, that's a challenge for the GNWT to address, but it is something that I think for a lot of professional women to take into consideration, as it can be quite a pay decrease. The U.S. senators came here at the end of June, and they were exploring a similar topic, and I'm not quite sure if they did a report on that, but they were from all different states, and one of the big things that I noticed was the difference in their sessions. So some of them have sessions they're all part-time, but some are 6 months on, 6 months off, and those can have an impact on the family. So I'm sure that looking at the term of, or the length of sessions possibly could have an impact too, but I think we'd have to explore whether that's a barrier and how much that would have to be decreased for women to put their names forward, because a lot of women are primary caregivers. The part about marketing, I think, is an interesting one, and I also heard it tonight of, I'm not into politics, and politics is just this interesting word where, when I deconstruct what I do, I don't consider myself a political person either before I got there, but mayor and city council is, do you want a sidewalk on your street? Do you want garbage to be picked up every week at the territorial level? Should birth control be free? That's politics, but I think we make it into this really big, and you have to be really smart. So I guess looking at our word choice when we're marketing, and again, the skills that we've acquired through life, through our volunteer experience, just by having a family and our work experience, I think there's a lot we can do. And I know that the campaign school is working on videos, and that's, I think, one of the modules they're touching on. But by coaching soccer was that opportunity we got to public speak, but it's hard to think of those two connected. And I would encourage the committee to look at the research when considering whether to go with this mandatory seats, because I think there's a lot of good research, and I like to look at the data as opposed to just, I think this might be a good idea. Others have done it, so let's take a look at that research. And I do think it'll probably have to be a radical idea if we really want to move the dial, because there's these little changes we can do, but it clearly hasn't been doing anything for the past 20, 30 years. So those are just a few comments for tonight. But again, thank you for taking a look into this matter, and hopefully something will move forward. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Questions or comments for Rebecca?
Perfect. Yeah. Slash, it's 9 o'clock. Yeah.
9 o'clock. Go ahead, Carolyn.
I just want to congratulate you on your election, and I want to state that you are a role model for many women, not only in this community, but throughout the Northwest Territories. So thank you for taking on the challenge, and congratulations for winning.
Thank you.
Rebecca, I have a question for you. This is a question I asked Jean Groenewegen last week in Hay River. It's hard to think about politics as a career when it's in 4-year increments, or it was sometimes in 3-year increments. So how hard was it for you to make that decision that you were going to leave the job you had with its terms and conditions for something that, as you said, is a term job in 4-year increments?
It was a really tough decision. The potential to pass up this growth opportunity, this professional development opportunity. I had a great opportunity and career with this company. I can be successful, but I'm only going to have this job in 4 years, and after that, who knows? But at the same time, that's my personality. I'm willing to take that risk for that personal growth, but I also don't have a family. I've got a bit of financial stability, so those were the pros to it, that I could jump into that risk, as opposed to I know that I guess I realize that I'm in a fortunate position because I have that background. But for others, you wouldn't be able to take that risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What Jane said about that was that she had other options if politics was a 4-year career. She's a business person, as you probably know, and so she would go back to being a business person.
Yeah.
So that's how she managed to do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. And I think everybody always thinks of running as scary, and it's definitely a roller coaster. You get your highs, you get your lows, but at the end of the day, it's an incredible opportunity and one that not many people get. And to be able to engage with such a wide array of residents, to talk about subjects that may have never occurred to you but are really interesting once you start to delve into it. It's a really neat experience, and I feel blessed to be able to have had the opportunity, but again, knowing that I'm in a good position to be able to capitalize on those opportunities.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Anything further for Carolyn or for Rebecca? Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay, last call. Anyone else who would like to make any remarks tonight?
I'm not going to get up there, I'm just going to speak from here.
No, we need to record it, please. Thelma, we won't bite you.
I didn't come with a presentation. I came here to listen to what everybody had to say. I will probably give a written comments based on what I heard tonight, but I'd just like to say two things. One is temporary measures, and I would like to echo what Dave said about, I don't think you guys are ambitious enough. And from the perspective of temporary measures, why are you not looking at young women who are in school? You have that parliament, but those people they're too old. You want to get, we've learned by doing volunteer work, if you want to get people interested in professions, get them when they're 8 years old. And why are you not directing some of the energy to this committee to young people? Because you're going to get a knee-jerk reaction to your temporary measures, but are you going to get a long-term implementation to your measures? And that's what I don't see here, and that's why I felt I had to at least say something now. The other thing, too, is from the perspective of using Samoa as an example, certainly worldwide, you don't find a lot of countries where you have a lot of female representation, but I like this lady who's doing all the research. Have you looked at countries where you do have an appreciable number of women, and why is that working? Mm-hmm. Look at why is that working. Don't look at Samoa where it's not working and they got ramrodded into using this option, because I'm with the engineering ladies, because I've been in that position myself, where you don't like to be the token woman. You would rather go into politics because you have a vision, you have a desire to do something for your jurisdiction. You don't want to go there because, oh yeah, well, I got into politics and I got in because they were hiring women. Like, give me a break. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Velma. I want to say that every other hearing we've had, someone has raised education, school-age education for...
My God.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's right. So as I say, every other place people have said, you need to start sooner, you need to start with school-age people. Don't worry about only teaching them at the campaign schools, but start ahead as well. So we would welcome you sending us your written remarks, so I hope that you'll do that. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone who came out tonight and took part in the conversation. And I want to assure you that we will be doing probably 2 reports. We're talking about doing an interim report that would be tabled during the budget session that would address measures that could be implemented in time for the next election, and then a final report which would look at measures that would require more time than we have left in our term. So if you think of something when you get home that you wished you'd said, by all means, let us know about that. And as I said, there are the handouts there. If you haven't already seen them, please take them. They've got the contact information on them as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming and wish you a good evening.